Each week, in partnership with the GI Museum in Gaucher, we interview veterans of the military about their experiences abroad. We'll air these stories unedited and unchanged. These heroes were there on the front lines and lived through unspeakable horrors to tell us their story. And now, we sit down with a true hero.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Local Heroes here on WKFK TV7, coming to you tonight from the GI Museum in Gaucher. Tonight we have a very, very special guest, Mr. Cliff Kuykendall. Mr. Kuykendall survived the sinking of the USS Tullabee, and what's significant about that is the Tullabee has a memorial, or a Tullabee-based memorial in Ocean Springs at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Welcome to the show, Mr. Cliff Kuykendall.
Thank you.
Mr. Kuykendall, the first question I like to ask is how you got into the Navy in World War II.
Well, I was living in Wichita Falls, Texas. I graduated from high school in 1941, and I was 17 years old on August 31st, 1941. And I'd always wanted to go in the Navy. I wanted to join the Navy and see the world. And after I became 17, I went down to the recruiting station, took the written examination, and was sent from Wichita Falls to Dallas, Texas, 150 miles southeast of there, where I was sworn into the Navy.
Was this prior to December the 7th, 1941?
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
So you were actually in the Navy when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
And were you in boot camp at that time?
Yes, I was in boot camp at Norfolk, Virginia, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
It sounds like we're getting bombed right now. This rainstorm's coming through here.
At that time, the Navy had a waiting list, and they said that they had a waiting list, and they put me on the waiting list, and I was on the waiting list about 2 or 3 months, and then I was called up to report to Dallas, Texas, to take a physical. If I passed it, to be sworn in.
But you were actually in training at boot camp on December the 7th.
Yes.
Do you remember that day and how did you find out about the Pearl Harbor being bombed?
Well, it just started out as more or less a rumor, how rumors circulate. It was first known in Washington, D.C. Norfolk, Virginia was not very far from Washington, D.C. And it was first known there, to the best of my knowledge, because the times were different and everything, and between the United States, the East Coast and Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And it started circulating around. The Japs have bombed Pearl Harbor. The Japs have bombed Pearl Harbor. And a lot of people were saying, I knew this was going to happen. I knew this was going to happen.
Did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
And oh yes, I knew
okay.
where Pearl Harbor was, in Hawaiian Islands, Oahu. And people were saying, we're at war with Japan. We're at war with Japan. I knew it was coming. And then when they found out that they labeled it a stab in the back, that it was a dirty blow and all that old stuff, and it aroused a tremendous amount of anger and patriotism, I might add.
But you were 17. You were 17 at this time.
17 years old.
And then you were in the United States Navy, just in the United States Navy. How did you feel about the possibility of going to war at 17 years old? I mean,
well,
it had to be. I know you were patriotic, and it may have stirred some anger in you. But 17 years old, how did you feel like going?
The minimum age to join the Navy then, I guess all military services, was 17. And then at that time, you had to get your next of kin's written consent before you could join. And your parent or your next of kin had to sign a special form giving their permission for you to enter the service. And I, at that time, I can honestly say it didn't worry me in the least. I guess when you're young, you think you'll live forever.
Yeah, you do. Yes, you do. So right after Pearl Harbor, you're in basic training, boot camp, and you get out of boot camp, and then you decide you're going to go to sub school?
No, I didn't at that time. When I graduated from boot camp, they sent me to gunnery school. They needed gunner's mates, evidently. They sent me to gunnery school at a place called Little Creek, Virginia, which is not very far. It's part of the Naval Operating Base where Norfolk, the base, is located. And after I went through gunnery school, I was assigned to surface ships. And I've been on a surface ship for a long time. And a pal and I that we palled around together, his name was John Hardy. He was from Colorado. And we were out on the town one evening and everything, and we saw a few submarine sailors wearing the dolphins on their cuffs. And they had a lot of girls in tow. And Hardy suggested that, why don't we join the submarine service? They get 50% hazardous duty pay, and the girls are crazy about them.
There's two big incentives right there.
So at that time, the vessel I was on was at the Navy base in New Orleans, Louisiana, having some work done on it, and we went down and submitted a letter to join the United States Submarine Service.
But
Request.
you were, yeah, but prior to that, let's get back to the patrol craft you were on. You were operating in the Gulf of Mexico.
Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean.
There's not been a lot written about it, not much history about it, but in talking to you earlier before the interview started, I found that there were a lot of German submarines in the Gulf of Mexico right off the shores of Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida.
Oh yes, there were quite a few.
Did y'all ever chase any or hear of any? Or
oh yes, we had sonar gear and we detected a lot of them, and the Germans at that time were using two types of submarines in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, the east coast of the United States. And the only one that could make the round trip from Germany or France, the base in France where they were operating, was a 9C submarine. It had the fuel to do it, to stay on the station a certain length of time. And the Germans also had a smaller submarine called a 7C. And it would have to be refueled to come all the way to the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean. And those submarines were refueled usually out in the middle of the Atlantic, where they in a good zone, and they called them milk cows. They were large German submarines and INDs that were fuel refueling submarines.
Basically
they would refuel
a tanker.
a 7C submarine. So they could operate in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean off the east coast of the United States.
So you decide that you're going to get some dolphins on your sleeve and more money in your pocket, and you submit a letter to go to sub school. And that happens for you, obviously.
Yes, we were in Port of Spain, Trinidad. And the yeoman called me in and says, Kuykendall, he said, get your gear together. He said, you've been accepted for submarine school. I'd forgotten all about it. And I said, I've been selected for submarine school? And he said, yes. He said, you're being sent to New London, Connecticut. And, well, back in the ZI. And he said, there's a Navy transport leaving here tomorrow, and he says, you're going to be on it. It's going to Norfolk, Virginia. And the Navy transport did go to Norfolk, Virginia. And I was unloaded in Norfolk, Virginia, and put on a train that went up to New London, Connecticut.
And then you went to sub school.
I went to sub school.
You'd been trained in gunnery for your surface craft. What was your skill, or what did you train for on the submarine? Did you stay in gunnery?
Gunner's mate.
You were a gunner's mate on the sub.
Right.
Which meant that when the sub surfaced, you went to surface action and you went to the deck gun?
Well, at that time, the in World War II, the submarines, American submarines, had deck guns and machine guns and 20 millimeters, and later on in the war they armed them with 40 millimeters also. But we had Thompson submachine guns also, and revolvers and pistols. And the gunner's mate's job was to take care of the guns. But that gunner's mate also had to learn how to do just about everything there was to be done on that submarine. He had to learn how to do other jobs. He had to qualify, and at that time, if you went out on war patrol, they would give you 2 war patrols to qualify, and you had to study also. You had to fill out forms, make drawings of the equipment and stuff like that, and it wasn't easy.
Well, it's my understanding that submarines had small crews, so everybody on there had to know everybody else's job in case something happened to one of the guys, that you could take over immediately and do his job. That had to be a tremendous amount of learning and a short learning curve on your part.
It's true, and the only place to study really was to make the drawings and everything was the crew's mess, and it was small. And there'd be someone in there wanting to eat or something like that, or get a snack, and you was in there trying to make drawings and whatnot. And according to what rate you held, you had other duties to perform. Like I stood lookout. I was a gunner's mate, and I stood lookout watches. And my battle station submerged was on the stern planes. They had bow planes and stern planes to operate the bow planes and the stern planes. And you had to learn other jobs. And when it come time for you to qualify, a commissioned officer would take you through that submarine. He'd ask you, what's that, how do you operate it, and so forth and so on. And I have often wondered how I qualified. I've often wondered. I didn't know I was that smart, but I still don't know. But I qualified, but I've often wondered how.
Mr. Kuykendall, we're going to have to stop right there and take a short break. Don't go away. We'll be back with more local heroes here on WKFK TV 7. Welcome back to Local Heroes, where we're talking to Mr. Cliff Kuykendall. And Mr. Kuykendall, before we went to the break, we were just talking about an officer having to take you to all the compartments and spaces on the submarine, and he would ask you about different pieces of equipment or different operating systems, and you had to explain it all, and then you became certified as a submariner.
Right, qualified.
Qualified, excuse me, as a submarine.
Then you got your Boulevard of the Dolphins.
And it made you, and then you got the Dolphins on your sleeve.
Yes, I could put the Dolphins on my sleeve.
You got more women and more pay, right, at that point?
Well, by then I realized that wasn't the case.
Oh, okay. So you're qualified as a submariner, and you get assigned to what submarine?
Well, I was at USS Tullabee.
Tullabee was your first submarine?
I served on another submarine for one patrol, and then I was assigned to the USS Tullabee.
So then you go to the Tullabee, and you made a war patrol on the Tullabee?
I made one war patrol on the USS Tenosa. SS-283. I filled in.
Okay.
And yeah, I knew I wasn't going to stay on it.
You knew you weren't going to stay on the...
I knew I wasn't going to stay on it, and I went back to the Tullabee.
And you would leave out of Pearl Harbor for your patrol?
Well, we'd the Tullabee operated out of Pearl Harbor, and they made patrol out of Pearl Harbor and out of Midway. We were overhauled in Midway once. Midway Island, northwest of Pearl Harbor. They had a submarine base there, usually a tender.
And your typical submarine patrol lasted how many days? A month? 2 months?
They would, as a whole, last anywhere from 65, maybe sometimes 80 days at the most. every patrol I served on did not last 80 days. They were less than that. It had everything to do with the amount of torpedoes you fired, and you could only operate so long because of fuel consumption.
And probably food.
If you had to operate at a high rate of speed and use more diesel fuel.
Now, on the third patrol that you served on the Tullabee, something happened to that ship. Could you tell us the circumstances about and kind of give us a little walkthrough of what happened? The night, was it at night when the Tullabee was sunk?
The Tullabee was lost on its fourth war patrol.
On the fourth war patrol.
Fourth war patrol.
But was the ship lost at night?
It was lost around 3:15 in the morning.
Yes, sir. Could you give us a kind of a walkthrough of what happened that night and where you were and what you were doing when that happened?
Well, we were to take part in what they called Operation Desecrate, which was the first carrier airstrike on the Palau Islands, which were due March the 30th and 31st. This carrier task force would be coming from Majuro Island and the Marshalls, and they would be sailing south of Truk, the Caroline Islands. And the Palau Islands, which actually I found out later were surrounded by 12 American submarines. 6 of them were from Pearl Harbor, and 6 of them were from Australia. And our main job was to sink enemy ships, Japanese ships, who we thought would be fleeing the islands to get away from the carrier airstrike, and to also pick up American pilots, Navy pilots, that were shot down or went down for mechanical reasons or something, to pick them up, rescue them. And that was our 2 main reasons. And around 8 p.m. On west of the 180th meridian, we picked up a radar contract. We knew the Japanese ships would be heading north. A lot of them would be heading north toward Japan. We picked up a radar contact around 24,000 yards, which was long distance. And it was around 8 p.m. And we started tracking this convoy, and we tracked it. Our patrol area was northwest of Babelthorpe, which was the largest island in the Palau group. And around 3 o'clock in the morning, I imagine we were around between 80 and 100 miles northwest of Babelthorpe in very deep water. And around shortly before, I went on lookout. Before we went on lookout, 15 minutes before we were due to go on lookout, we had to go to the conning tower compartment and put on the red goggles. That would get your eyes adjusted to night vision. And then you would go to the bridge. You'd stand underneath the hatch leading to the bridge and say, look out to the bridge, sir, and the OD or whoever would say, come on up. He would assign you to your lookout post. And I went up around 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was told to man the starboard after lookout alongside the periscope shears. And around 3:15, this particular night we went in, and the submarine had made several runs into the convoy prior to that, but it was a very dark night, and they were attacking by radar. And we went in, and we fired 2 bow torpedoes. I knew that they had fired them because you could hear the swish, you could feel the submarine shake. And we had slowed down considerably, and the decks were almost awash, so we could make a quick dive if necessary. and it was very dark. And I'd say about 25 minutes after the first torpedo was, about 25 seconds after the first torpedo was fired, just seemed like a red film passed over my eyes. And I didn't hear an explosion. I didn't feel an explosion, but it knocked me mostly unconscious. And when I came to, it seemed like I was about 100 feet up in the air, and I looked down, and I saw the stern of the Tullabee drop beneath the surface of the ocean. And I just was more or less in a state of shock. I didn't know what was happening. And the next time, when I came to, I was almost drowned, and I was submerged in the ocean. And I fought my way to the surface, and the surface was covered with diesel oil, and I had swallowed enough diesel oil that I could taste it for a year after that. And I heard voices for about 8 or 10 minutes. I couldn't distinguish what they were saying. Now, there were 6 men on the bridge, including me, 5 besides me. And I have to say, this is the reason I'm still alive. When I was in the control room getting ready to go up to put on the red goggles, an electrician's mate, first class, come down the ladder. He'd been up on the bridge to see what he could see, you know, the Japanese ships. And he was carrying a life belt in his hand. The kind of life belts we wore would fasten around your waist, and they had a tube on them with a valve. You had to blow them up. Then you close the valve when you got enough air in them to keep you afloat. You had to. It didn't have. You couldn't do it automatically. You had to blow them up. And he told me, he said, "Cliff, take this. Here's your life belt." I had never worn a life belt on a submarine before in my whole life. On when I was topside. I said, "I don't want that." He said, "Oh yeah, take it." I said, "No, I don't want it." He said, "No, go ahead and take it. You might need it." So I just took the life belt and fastened it around my waist and forgot about it. And then when I was struggling in the ocean to stay alive, I suddenly remember I had that life belt. And I unfastened it and took it up and blew on it. And it took me a long time to get enough air in it to where it'd keep me afloat. I never did. I only got it about half full. And that's what saved my life. But I never got a chance to thank the man that gave me that life belt.
He went down with the ship.
He went down with the Tullabee.
What a story. Wow. Amazing. Well, Mr. Kuykendall, we're just about out of time for this show, and regrettably we're going to have to end this one, but we're going to pick up with this story, and I'm going to ask you a whole lot more about it, be assured of that, on our next edition of Local Heroes. So you can't miss that one. Folks, you got to hear the rest of this. Join us again next week for more of Local Heroes and the rest of this story.